here's the calculus, right? Building a major ride for Disney right now is $200 or $300 million. That's a hole of $200 or $300 million. Let's say you're making $50 million a year just selling fast passes for the major mountain rides in the Magic Kingdom. Why would you add capacity and lower weights? You'd go $300 million in the hole before you started seeing $1. Like, why would you do that? So I think the thing that that Disney's got to look at, or that we have to look at as consumers, is paid fast pass going to be a disincentive for Disney to build new rides?
That is Len Testa of touringplans.com, the Disney Dish, and the Unofficial Guide, who is here for a theme park think tank. Get ready. This is going to be fun. You're listening to the Tomorrow Society Podcast. Welcome to episode 146 of the Tomorrow Society Podcast. I am your host, Dan Heaton. Really excited about today's show. Talked a bunch to Len Testa in the early years of the Tomorrow Society Podcast. He was on 4 times, once a year for the first 4 years, but it's been over 2 years since Len has been on the show. Been listening to Len basically forever, going back to the wonderful original WDW Today podcast. Have to clarify it was the original. And then currently on the Disney Dish, touringplans.com, co-author of the Unofficial Guide to Walt Disney World. That's really just the basics. He knows a lot about theme parks, so I thought he was the perfect person to do something I haven't really done exactly before, which is a theme park think tank. And what I mean by that is we come up with just a few broad topics. In this case, it's transportation, queues and fast pass, where we talk a lot about paid fast pass, and then attractions and what's happening there, and then some just global issues for the resort. We're focusing a lot on Walt Disney World, but we will talk about Universal and Disneyland and kind of other surrounding issues relating to that, but obviously the focus is the big resort from Disney in Orlando. And what interested me about this to talk to Len is that I feel like we are at a time when so much news is flying in about big changes to how things are done at Disney and beyond, where, we recorded this a little over a week ago, and since that point, Disney has announced Disneyland annual passes and how that's going to work. They're not called annual passes anymore, Dan. Need to remember that. Or the pricing and the sample itinerary for the Star Wars hotel. And just the news seems to be flying in right now. And instead of just trying to predict what's going to happen, I thought it would be cool, one, to talk about current situation, but also things that we would like to see Disney do. I mean, this isn't totally off the wall. This isn't one of those, hey, let's pick up an attraction and move into Epcot kind of things. It's more grounded, but the idea of, like with transportation, what could Disney do to make things more efficient for them and also for the guest? And of course, you have that big push and pull. And I appreciate that Len is so candid and honest. You heard a bit in the intro about where Disney's current management's motivation may be. So you always have that where we're talking about these would be great to help satisfy the guest and make a better trip. But then you have to remember, are these going to lead to greater short-term profits and to help the shareholders? Possibly not. So there's all of that push and pull going on, and I found it really interesting to talk to Len. We went on for quite a while, so I want us to get right into the conversation. I hope you enjoyed it. I would love to hear what you think about this show, because it's a lot more issues-based rather than, talking to an Imagineer or a guest. It's a bit different. But I really appreciate doing this because I feel like Len's perfect to really dive into these issues and go well beyond just the surface level of like, that's too expensive, it's too crowded, to really dig into why and decisions that are made that could lead to it. So let's do it. Here is Len Testa.
Thanks for having me, Dan. How's it going?
Oh, it's going great.
Anything happened since 2019? Anything at all?
No, the parks are pretty much the same.
Yeah, all right,
The
then.
world.
Well, this was great. I appreciate it. Thank you.
That's all we really got. Yeah. I mean, I probably should listen to that podcast again and be like, oh, we were so naive.
Yeah. Oh, we were so young and naive. Yeah, exactly.
It's been so long. But yeah, so what we're going to do today, first I just want to mention it, is Len and I are going to do a theme park think tank where we're going to talk about 4 big topics and kind of talking about not predicting. I mean, we'll talk about issues that are going on now. It's not completely in the theoretical, but some fun ideas that probably wouldn't happen, but we think could be helpful. Before we do that, though, Len, I would like to know, how are things going at touring plans? Because I know, obviously, like you just mentioned, the world is a little different. I mean, the parks are open, but what have you been focusing on more recently?
So the main focus that we've had in the last few months is trying to keep up with not only Disney's park policy changes, but also how they're responding to things like staff shortages and supply chain shortages, and really what that means for guests, right? So if you're going to Walt Disney World, for example, and you're staying at a Disney hotel, what does Disney's shortage of bus drivers mean to you on a day-to-day basis? Like how much earlier, for example, do you need to leave your resort to be at the parks on time? And things like that. Things around like how when social distancing was happening with lines, for example, how Disney stacking people outside of the rides instead of inside the rides can affect both Disney's posted wait time and actual wait times. So stuff like that, saying, really trying to figure out how the parks are actually operating on a day-to-day basis is the thing we've been focusing on the most.
Has it been challenging given just how fluid everything's been with, and also how we don't always know, like for a while the parks were at a certain capacity and then things change and then they keep opening new resorts and there's so many changes. It's been hard because it's different, I think, than before where you had a pretty good gauge of what, pre-pandemic, how Disney operated. Has it been tricky to stay on top of it?
During the pandemic, we added staff to be able to cover more ground on any given day. And that served us really, really well. The thing that we've done more recently is trying to figure out like what capacity the rides are running at. Like, for example, there was a point where Space Mountain, for whatever reason, was running at like 50% of its normal capacity. But Kilimanjaro Safaris, because it's outdoors, was running at like 87% of its capacity. So when you're trying to figure out things like what the wait times might be tomorrow for those rides, knowing what capacity they were at was sort of integral to what we were doing. So we spent a lot of time sitting at the exits to rides and simply counting the number of people coming off, and doing that over and over as Disney increased its park capacity, trying to figure out, how they were increasing it and so on.
Well, cool. Well, that's interesting, yeah, because I know that it's unprecedented just and having to stay on top of it is definitely a challenge. And obviously going forward, still going to be that way as, park passes and everything else still seem to keep changing in capacities.
Yep.
So you've got a few things you can work on, stay busy.
We don't lack for work. That's what I tell people all the time.
Well, great. Well, let's dive into this think tank we're going to do here because I think, I don't want it just be about the pandemic, but obviously it could impact especially some of the elements that we're talking about here. And the first topic I wanted to talk about is transportation, because we've seen Disney, they've made some interesting updates fairly recently with the walkway finally to the Magic Kingdom, and then, of course, the Skyliner. And what do you think are some of the big issues still, going forward that we would need to solve for if we had, if we were making kind of the big choices beyond that looking forward?
Sure. In the short term, I think the big issue that Disney faces is simply a lack of workers for its transportation network. Disney runs the third largest bus system in Florida, behind Jacksonville and Miami. And like every major city, they're having trouble finding qualified bus drivers. Like from what I understand, the way I phrase that is I've actually talked to the bus drivers. They're basically importing them from like New York, New Jersey. If you have a CDL license or you can drive a bus, Disney will fly you down and put you up at a hotel just so you can drive the bus every day. And that's why you see a number of third-party buses like Academy Travel, on site. They're hiring third parties because they can't staff it themselves. That's a short-term problem though. So if you think about the long-term things, like as the number of as the number of people who visit the Walt Disney Resort grows, as they build more hotels, as they build more attractions, the congestion, the transportation network becomes more clogged. So, over the long term, they definitely have to think about how to solve that problem. But the other thing that they run into is, did you know that Disney as a company has an internal carbon tax policy for the entire company?
I didn't, but it doesn't shock me given their size. But yeah.
So every major group, consumer products, theme parks, movies, they have an internal carbon tax. So every project is assessed for its carbon footprint. Things that are carbon positive, like things that introduce carbon into the atmosphere, get taxed, and things that take away carbon, you get a credit, right? So, and the way that it works is that at the end of the year, every division adds up its debits and credits, and they pay it to an internal fund managed by Disney, whatever that cost is. And then sometimes they can make money back. So a lot of people don't know that. But if you think about the internal carbon tax as a motivator for making decisions about theme parks, a lot of things sort of make sense, both from a carrot and a stick approach for Disney. So if you look at things like Magical Express, right? Magical Express is a carrot. If you think about it in terms of carbon tax, everyone should use public transportation because it introduces less carbon into the environment than driving your own car, right? Similarly, charging people for parking is a stick. We don't want you to do this. If you do, it costs us money. The interesting thing is that Disney has found a way to make money on both sides of that equation. By providing you a bus service, they limit your ability to go off-site. And by charging you for parking, they make money too. So give Disney credit for figuring out how to make money on both sides of that. If you look at some of Disney's philosophy around that, you can explain a lot of things with the carbon tax thing. By the way, I found this wasn't my idea. I actually was doing some research, and I found an article by someone, a journal publication, by someone who had actually proposed this idea many years ago and then been hired by Disney to implement it. And so when I contacted them to say, hey, I have some questions about this article, not only did they not respond to me, but the article on their website mysteriously went away.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, Disney doesn't want to talk about it. So in some cases, Disney decides that the cost benefit analysis on the carbon footprint, isn't worth the cost benefit to some other part. So they're getting rid of Magical Express at the end of 2021. And the reason for that has nothing to do with carbon tax, but it has everything to do with the fact that they're essentially subsidizing the trip between Orlando International Airport and Walt Disney World, and they're not seeing as much benefit as they thought they would. So that's one thing. But I think if you think about not only in terms of carbon tax, but also relatively inexpensive things that Disney could do to change behavior. You mentioned walkways, the walkway between the Grand Floridian and the Magic Kingdom. That's an excellent example of what Disney can do. And I've walked that walkway. I think I was one of the early advocates for it, saying why can't we walk from the Magic Kingdom to the Grand Floridian? That's just silly. So if you look at other places where they could introduce walkways that would link a large number of people to a theme park, the one that stands out to me is linking the Riviera to Epcot, which I know is not the one that most people think of. Everyone thinks Animal Kingdom to Animal Kingdom Lodge, right? Okay. But the Riviera Skyliner Station is about a quarter mile from the front, from there to the front of the Germany Pavilion in Epcot. So just to put that in perspective, that's less than the distance from the far end of the Contemporary Garden Wing to the Contemporary bus stop.
Oh my gosh.
That's how close Riviera is to Germany. Obviously, that would require a third entrance into Epcot, right? And pedestrian bridge and whatnot. But there's no technical reason why they couldn't do it. And they've already got the Skyliner, so it would be another moat. But just to put that in perspective, the other thing is the walkway from the Animal Kingdom Lodge AKL lobby to Pandora, which would be the closest part of the Animal Kingdom, is around 9/10 of a mile. And 9/10 of a mile, sounds like a lot. But that's actually, it's considered you walk 7 to 10 miles a day. It's not really a whole lot.
Yeah. It's 15 minutes basically if you walk fast, or 20 minutes.
Yeah. So it's within a few hundred feet of the walking distance from the Boardwalk lobby to Hollywood Studios. And lots of people do that. So I think Animal Kingdom Lodge lobby to Pandora would be not only a sort of a common sense link, but you would walk through the savannah, at least on part of Animal Kingdom Lodge, and then past a waterway that exists between the lodge and the park. So it's scenic, it's thematically correct. I think that's doable. 9/10 of a mile, to your point, 15, 20 minutes. That makes total sense to me, and it would save you bus service. I would definitely walk it. Like if I had a choice between walking, I would. In fact, we stayed at the Polynesian last week, and we made the walk from the Poly to the Magic Kingdom. Not because we didn't want to get on the transportation, but like, why not walk it if it's nice?
I love both ideas because, we stay a lot at the Animal Kingdom Lodge, and just, you think about it, like from your room to the lobby, then you walk down to the buses. Let's say you're at Jumbo, you take the buses, then you walk from there to the station. I mean, there are other elements, and it's even more in some places. Well, especially with no trams.
You can walk a mile without knowing it. Yeah. Trams, exactly. And trams aren't even running yet, right?
Yeah.
So if you parked at Magic Kingdom, you're going to walk out, half a mile one way or the other.
Yeah, and it seems also too, putting on our business Disney hat, things like this don't seem, I know they're more expensive than I realize, because you're thinking, you got to pay things, you have to think about shade and coverage and maybe other
and security. And for Magic Kingdom to Grand Floridian, they had to do a pivoting bridge, which is not cheap, right? But still, it's cheaper than any other. A bus costs $500,000, right? So it's cheaper than any other, long-term investment, right?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea because I feel like as more and more people come, even me, even with my girls who, don't love just walking forever, you just walk slow, you chill, you don't have to smash onto a bus with 10 million people. And that's never a good way to start the day. It's just it's a nice way to start the day and seems reasonable. To me, yes, you can say, let's get more monorails. That's great. But that's millions and millions and millions of dollars, and Disney doesn't seem that interested, even with, I would assume that would help with the carbon issue you brought up earlier, but seems less feasible. I think the Riviera is a good example that I hadn't even thought about, because it's sure, they have to put in a new entrance and have staff that, and then security and everything, but the benefit and also possibly the people wanting to stay there, that could be helpful, because that's what they need.
You're walking distance to a park, right? Yeah, that's a huge selling point. And sort of going along those lines, I think as Disney looks to add resorts, add hotels to Walt Disney World, I think the transportation question is going to be central in the placement of those resorts. Like if you think about where All Star is right now, it's not walking distance to everything. Coronado's not walking distance, to anything. I would be very surprised if Disney built its next moderate or deluxe resort that was not walking distance to a park, especially, like a deluxe, whatever the next deluxe is. I would be very, very surprised if it wasn't walking distance to one of the parks, simply because it alleviates transportation issues, right? So you add hotel capacity without adding transportation problems. And that's another reason why I kind of like the Skyliner. If you think about the Skyliner, going back to the Riviera, the Skyliner solves a couple of transportation problems for Disney. Number one is you don't add vehicles to the road. Regardless of what Disney does, it can't control whether people drive their own cars around Walt Disney World, right? And that's always going to be, a thing. I think that they have to be concerned with. The Skyliner takes cars off the road, takes buses off the road. It requires fewer staff, right, per person, per capita. And the other interesting thing is because it's run by electricity, you can power it through the solar power farm that Disney's constructed. So going back to their internal carbon tax, this is a net win, for them on that. The issue that with the Skyliner is, like anything Disney does, the cost for Disney to do that thing is multiples of what it costs other companies to do it. So my understanding is that the first round of the Skyliner, if you had to ballpark estimate it for Disney, cost something like $300 million.
Wow.
Which is an incredible amount of money. So to put that in perspective, if a city were to implement a gondola type system like that, you would expect them to pay, I think Germany did it like a major system, and they paid something like $13 to $15 million per mile. Disney's probably looking at $50 million per mile more, right? So their costs are, 3, 4, 5 times what a city's. And that's because, Disney's got a lot of overhead. But if you look at the Skyliner and you think about what the next, first of all, the Skyliner is a huge success. Right?
Yeah.
But if you try and make an economic argument for the Skyliner, right? We'll do some numbers. So Caribbean Beach, right? Caribbean Beach's cheapest rooms in 2019, before the Skyliner was introduced, were $195 in 2021 dollars. So inflation adjusted, apples to apples comparison, $195. Now the cheapest rooms are $240, right? And that's rack rate. So 23% premium after inflation, almost entirely because of the Skyliner. Like if you ask people why they stay at the Caribbean Beach right now, the Skyliner is either the number one or number two reason. Number one might be availability, but number two is Skyliner. So if you think that, and this is just a ballpark estimate, if you think that the Skyliner added 10% to Caribbean Beach's occupancy, that's $2.5 million a year in revenue just from the Skyliner, which again, it costs $300 million. You're not going to pay for the Skyliner just doing that, right? But Disney knows that they can charge more for rooms that are connected to the Skyliner. POP, AOA, right? Same thing. So the next question would be is, where would they put the next Skyliner route to be able to maximize their revenue? Where do you think that would go to?
Well, there's multiple ways you could do it, because I think about some of the resorts that are not as expensive. Like, I hate to always go to the Animal Kingdom Lodge, but that one is the cheapest deluxe. And you see what's happened with the Wilderness Lodge, where how much more expensive it is. But would they do Epcot, or would they do, I don't know, would they do this? I'm asking like 20 different options here. But would they go to like Coronado and that area, like the All-Stars in Coronado and all that? Or would they go more, are they beefing up the value and moderates like they've done with Pop Century? Or are they looking to beef up some of the lower end deluxes? That's where I'm trying to figure out. What do you think?
So if you think about the deluxes, especially the Epcot area deluxes, right? They're already walking distance to two parks.
Right.
I don't think that's going to be a focus for Disney. Plus, they've also got Skyliner, right? Mm-hmm. And Watercraft. I think you're exactly right, though. I think they look at the stuff that's on the western side of property for two reasons. One is just in terms of number of rooms. All-Star is like, 5,400 rooms, right? Animal Kingdom Lodge in Kidani is another 1,000 and change. If you think about how many buses it takes to service those people and the amount of distance that those buses have to cover, right? Not only that, but the traffic, the interchanges that they've got to go through and the delays that they cause. I think I'd be very surprised if the All-Stars, Animal Kingdom, and Coronado were not the focus of the next round of Skyliner. And so the interesting thing about that is and I drew this out, we can share screens if you want, but I sort of drew out where the route would go. So the interesting thing is Coronado, Blizzard Beach, and the All-Stars are sort of north-south in a line. So if you think about Blizzard Beach as the hub, basically taking the function of what Caribbean Beach is doing right now. Caribbean Beach is sort of the hub between, the Pop Century and Art of Animation, Hollywood Studios, and then you're way onto Epcot. Blizzard Beach becomes a hub. And with that, you can connect Coronado, all the All-Star resorts, and the Animal Kingdom Park. And then you connect that to Hollywood Studios and make Hollywood Studios another hub. That's the shortest distance to connect almost 7,000 rooms to the existing Skyliner.
I think it makes a lot of sense because I think that, and plus two, like you said, you're beefing it up where you can charge more across the board. And I even think about Blizzard Beach, where I think, if I was at one of those resorts and could just hop on the Skyliner and go to Blizzard Beach, I might be more likely to do it. More likely than just driving over there or taking a bus or whatever. I know you got all your wet stuff and everything, so that's fun. But still, I would be more likely probably to go there assuming again that the Skyliner is running well and there aren't big lines. And I don't think there would be, especially in the middle of the day. Yeah,
I think, in talking to people who picked Caribbean Beach or, Pop Century or Art of Animation specifically because of the Skyliner, they view the Skyliner as an attraction, like Space Mountain, no doubt, like 100% of them do. And so by connecting All Stars, Coronado, Blizzard Beach, and Animal Kingdom, you've connected all of the value resorts to 3 theme parks, right?
Yeah.
Which is a lot of transportation problems alleviated. Now, again, that's probably $200 million to Disney to do it. I don't know that you make that back just in hotel revenue, but there's a lot of appeal there, right?
Yeah, and maybe too, you say it's not, I mean, I don't know how you develop an ROI analysis, but you run surveys, whatever. Maybe some people are coming to Disney World because of that. That's like enough of a draw. It's almost like you said, it's like adding Cosmic Rewind or Tron or whatever. It's like something new they want to see. It's
an attraction, no doubt. And we'll talk a little bit more about how Disney's sort of capitalizing on the on-site stuff, but it's definitely something that goes into their equation. So in addition to the carbon tax, it's how much more can we charge per night for these hotels? They are 100% doing that with their calculations. The big question is like, now that they have these existing hubs now that Hollywood Studios is a terminus and Epcot's a terminus, like how does the second round of Skyliner stuff link into that? I'd be surprised if they didn't do a second round of Skyliner. I think it's just a matter of time. The other thing that they might do that I've heard is link Disney Springs in, which makes it easier to get to Disney Springs. And if you think about that, driving to Disney Springs, even if you're taking a Disney bus, is still sort of like the big hassle.
Yeah.
Of getting to Springs, because you got to park or you got to use the bus or whatever. And Disney's done great things. If you look at their bus express lanes on Buena Vista Drive, that's really, really, really good.
Oh yeah,
that's creative. That has taken out a lot of traffic too. But by the same token, it's not the same thing as getting on a Skyliner.
Yeah. Well, I guess we should move on to the next topic here.
So real quick, let's talk about Magical Express. Real quick.
We should do that. Okay. Magical Express. So where do you want to start with that?
So Magical Express is going away December 31st. I've actually got calls in to Mears Connect, which is Mears runs. Right. Mears Transportation in Orlando runs Magical Express. The Disney outsources it to them. So, and from what I understand, when Disney made the decision not to extend Magical Express beyond the end of 2021, Mears found out about it basically the same time that we did.
Oh, wow.
And so Mears, took some time and thought, well, we're already running this transportation network and Disney's paying us. Why don't we just keep doing what we're doing, but call it something different? So the big thing about Mears Connect, it'll launch January 1st, 2022, the same day that, or the day after Magical Express ends. What I don't know is the transportation times and then the cost. And I don't think Mears has figured that out yet. But I do have calls into both their executive team and their PR team asking this question. So I would imagine in the next month or so, we're gonna hear about that. The other thing that's interesting with that is if you look at what Orlando International Airport is doing, not only around their new Terminal C, like their third terminal, but also their connecting of light rail to Disney Springs. I think that's like a 5-year outplay, because even if you can get from the airport to Disney Springs, there's still that last mile problem. Like, what do you do to get that last mile to your hotel? So they haven't figured that part out yet, but that's something that I think over time will be interesting as well.
Yeah, it surprised me, the Magical Express. I mean, it makes sense. There are ways you can say it makes sense, but it still surprised me because I felt like it was such, personally, as someone with kids, even though, yes, sometimes it was slow and all that, it was still a draw to stay on site, especially on the way back for some reason. Like, I felt like being able to check your luggage at the hotel on the way back was almost better. Like, the way there, it's kind of like you gotta wait forever. It's not the best, but still, and even just like the weird stuff, like the videos and all that, the girls, it's like you started it that way. I mean, I hate to be the PR guy, but I mean, I could see them wanting to get out of it. Like you said earlier, it doesn't really match, they aren't seeing the benefits they thought they would, and there is a lot of infrastructure, but I don't know. I'd be curious to see what happens with Mears Connect, because even if it costs something, especially given right now what it costs to rent a car in Orlando. It's not as simple as it used to be.
No, I mean, there were periods like in May and June where, to rent a car for a week in Orlando was $700. Yeah. And that's insane. Even now, like if you wanted to Uber to and from the airport, if you're going during peak times, rush hour, 9 a.m., 5 p.m., whatever, it's $80 one way plus tip.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
So I
think Mears Connect has a chance. It depends on the pricing. It depends on the convenience. We'll see. If they price it, at $20 per person, that's about the cost of an expensive Uber. If it's more than that, $25, let's say $25 one way each person, it's probably cheaper to get a town car. I think that's going to be the upper limit for the price. If it's more than $25, people will just rent town cars. I'm not sure that for most people, especially if you're staying primarily on site, I'm not sure that renting a car makes financial sense when you consider the high cost of the car plus the parking fee. For most people, if you're leaving property once or twice, it might be cheaper to Uber. But we'll see. There's still a lot to be worked out. It's going to come down to the cost of Mears Connect.
Yeah, I mean, because that's the thing. When they announced it with, like you mentioned, the train, my first thought was, originally, very early, they were saying it was going to be much sooner. And I was like, it's not going to be that soon. There's no way.
Yeah, there's no way.
And it was like, it's not going to be 2023. That's just not possible. And then two, okay, I'm at Disney Springs. Unless I'm staying at Saratoga or one of the downtown Disney resorts, what do I do now? I got to Uber then. That's not helpful.
It's still that last mile thing, right? Yeah, exactly. So you still got to do that. Yeah.
Okay. So anything else with Magical Express, or should we move on to the next?
Let's move on.
Okay. Yeah, the next two kind of relate together, but the first, because they all kind of focusing around attractions. But let's start. Mm-hmm. The second one is more queues. I feel like it's almost two main things. It's like queues and FastPass, but really I feel like the two big issues, one having to do with virtual queues and kind of, but they really go together. I mean, this is all one topic. And two, with FastPass, obviously Disneyland Paris had, which is a little different, international park. This has come up before. We've had this in Shanghai, other places. But Disneyland Paris came out with a per attraction fee, not a max pass type setup, and for certain select attractions. So, I mean, the thought is, and we're not going to, I'm not going to have you reveal anything insider info, but the thought is likely coming to Walt Disney World and Disneyland at some point. And so here we can talk about pros and cons and what that can do. But I figure let's kind of start on that note where right now, obviously, all standby. They haven't brought FastPass back. They're probably not going to bring back the same FastPass Plus, which to me already had kind of pluses and minuses. Looking at the issues they're trying to solve, what are some, I mean, if they come back paid, what's a way they could do it that would be beneficial, I guess, that would be beyond, because I was totally ready to pay for Max Pass when we were going to Disneyland, but I know that doesn't really translate well to Disney World. What's the way they can do it, at least from your perspective, that might make a lot of sense for the guests, not just for their pocketbook?
I don't think anything that Disney is considering is going to make sense for guests. So, my first big bullet point, my notes for this is that the big shift here in Disney policy is from trying to maximize guest satisfaction, which is what FastPass was doing, to monetizing not waiting in line. So if you look at the original pitch for FastPass Plus, the thing that Disney pitched to the board of directors, it was based on the premise that guests who used paper FastPass were more satisfied than guests who didn't. Number one fundamental assumption. I have the deck. I've seen it. So I know that that's true. And the idea there was that, I think the average number of fast passes used per guest at the time was like 1 point something per day. But Disney had seen, sort of a correlation, like those guests who used 2 fast passes were more satisfied than guests who used 1, who were more satisfied than guests who used none. And the interesting thing about that was that when Disney was doing the analysis, when they were pitching FastPass Plus, and whatever the $2 billion cost was, to the board of directors, the thing that they said was, look, we think, based on our best estimates, that when we implement FastPass Plus, it's going to cause an increase in wait times at attractions like Space Mountain. But the overall satisfaction of guests will still be higher than it was, because the memory, the feeling that the positive feeling that they got by feeling like they beat the line at whatever rides they got FastPass for will overcome the incremental bad feeling they got from waiting 8 minutes more at Space Mountain, right? So win-win there. It turns out that their wait time estimates were completely wrong, that waits for Space Mountain actually went down because FastPass Plus distributed guests more evenly throughout the park. That's a separate issue. But their intent at the time with FastPass Plus was obviously and clearly increasing guest satisfaction. The thing that we always wondered was like, Disney's so analytics focused. Like, how did they think that they were going to make money on that? Like, was it from being, on site where on site guests got more? And there were things in the deck. There are things in this presentation like, maybe we bias FastPass Plus towards on-site guests or whatever, or we limit the number of attractions or the kinds of attractions that off-site guests could get. And that, but it was like this whole thing was like the thing that was unclear was like, okay, guest satisfaction goes up by allocating, short waits in line, but how do we make money from that? That was never really like super clear in the presentation. So Disney now is being super clear about prioritizing money as the way you don't wait in line. Like they will make money by selling shorter waits in line. And that's interesting for a number of reasons. One is we all know that the times that are listed on attraction signs are not always accurate, right? Sometimes intentionally, sometimes accidentally. But when you go to sell someone a fast pass saying, hey, the line at Seven Dwarfs Mine Train is 80 minutes. Would you like to buy a fast pass for $10? Part of that decision that the consumer has to make is whether their 80 minutes in the line is worth $10, right? I mean, that's actually the explicit thing that the consumer has to do. You might make a different choice if you knew the actual wait time was 25 minutes. So from Disney's perspective, I really want to see, Dan, like how much time the lawyers are spending on the disclaimer that says, look, we're saying the posted wait time is 80 minutes, but it could be 25. And, we could even know that. And we could be lying to you intentionally, and you're not going to sue us for it. Like the amount of time that the lawyers are going to spend on the disclaimers for paid FastPass is going to be a substantial fraction of the overall cost of whatever it takes to implement it. Like I'm convinced. The other thing about that, and so I think, paid FastPass is coming to Walt Disney World.
Yeah.
That's a given. The thing that I haven't heard, and I think this is still up in the air, two things. One, will there be any free FastPasses? Jim Hale, my co-host on the Disney Dish, likes to joke that, Disney might adopt the drug dealer perspective where their first taste is free, right? So you might get a free FastPass to like Magic Carpets of Aladdin, right? Relatively small attraction, relatively low weights, right? Just to show you what the value is and maybe get you to buy something else, or, Carousel of Progress or whatever. Do you remember like when we had paper FastPass machines that Disney would occasionally give you a surprise FastPass for like PhilharMagic?
Yes.
Didn't cost Disney anything. Didn't affect attraction capacity at all. But basically it was this promotional tool. So, the big question is whether Disney's going to do some free FastPasses as a taste. The other thing is I would be very surprised if Disney actually called this thing FastPass.
Right.
And the reason is that we all associate FastPass with being free, and charging for it is now would be sort of a difficult thing for media relations to explain. Like, why are you charging for this thing that is free? The other thing that I've heard is that they're going to start doing virtual queues more. So if you look inside the inner workings of my Disney experience, there's definitely been code added over the last year that allows for virtual queues like we have at Rise of the Resistance at other attractions. And the idea being that you don't have to physically stand in line. You can go out and do something else, but not in the way that we think. So like right now, do you remember during the pandemic at Hollywood Studios, there was a point where because of social distancing, the line from Slinky Dog Dash went from the entrance of Slinky Dog Dash all the way back through Toy Story Land, back down what used to be Pixar Place, past One Man's Dream, and all the way down to past the entrance of Voyage of the Little Mermaid on the way towards Star Wars Launch Bay. And at that point, Disney had two choices. They could start snaking the line back around to Animation Courtyard, or they could cap the line and say no one else can enter it, come back later to enter the line. And Disney chose the latter. They said no one can enter the line at this point. And basically what that was then was a virtual queue. Come back later and you can enter the standby line. So the way I understand virtual queues to work going forward is sort of like Universal's doing it with Hagrid's, where at the beginning of the day, anyone can enter the standby line. But once the standby line reaches a certain point, say 90 minutes, you will not be able to enter the standby line. You will be able to enter the virtual queue, and they'll tell you when you can come back and get in that 90-minute line. So you'll have the standby queue, you'll have virtual queue, you'll have paid fast passes. The thing that's interesting to me is Disney's a large company. They get millions of visitors a year, many of them international. I don't think that everyone that went to Walt Disney World ever understood FastPass, and it was around for 20 years. And that was basically two lines, right? The FastPass line and the standby line. Adding in a third line, especially one which is conditional, like a virtual queue that only operates under certain conditions. The educational aspect of that Disney would have to undertake would be massive. And I'm not sure that operationally that would go smoothly. Bob Selinger and I one time, when FastPass had been running for a couple of years, FastPass Plus had been running for a couple of years, there were still times where the line to get in the FastPass line was still 30 minutes long. So one day Bob and I took an entire morning and went around the Magic Kingdom trying to figure out why. Like, why do people not understand tap and go, right?
Yeah.
And it turns out that people make a lot of assumptions about how they think the program works. So a number of international visitors, for example, thought that, they knew that you got 3 fast passes, right? Everyone sort of understood that. But we talked to some guests who thought that, I thought I could just tap on any 3 attractions and go in, and somehow the system would magically understand,
right,
what I wanted. So, the idea of making a reservation wasn't something that they figured out. And let me just say, by the way, that's a perfectly valid assumption.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I totally understand how a system could work like that. Other people thought they'd made a reservation and didn't. Lots of people showing up 5 minutes early, 5 minutes late, stuff like that, where the system wasn't accommodating, or 15 minutes early, 15 minutes late, and not knowing how precisely Disney was following the rules, and a lot of people simply not knowing how it worked. So, and that was just for 2 lines. With 3 lines, the initial rollout of that just tells me like it's going to be super challenging.
There's so many things you just mentioned that we could go into, but the complexity of it, because I think about even Universal with front of the line, it's smaller setup, everything.
Yeah.
Or even like your local, I think like Cedar Point or something, or Six Flags, where it's
they can do it. Smaller scale, they can do it. Yeah.
You pay one fee, you go through, a lot of them you go through the exit, you get on, pretty simple, pretty straightforward, as many as you want for most cases, with a few exceptions. They might have attractions that aren't included or whatever. So this to me, though, seems so complicated. And even, I think of virtual queues, like what they're dealing with Rise of the Resistance and Web Slingers to a lesser extent. It's probably not going to be that way. They can't do that boarding group thing with a lot of attractions. But overall...
so that's actually a great point. There'd actually be 4 different ways to access an attraction, then, right?
And I already think about the boarding group thing. And when I heard they were doing it with Web Slingers, I'm like, oh no, that means they're going to do it with... They might do it with Tron or Guardians or whatever. And my head wants to explode. And I just think the overall narrative, I think almost everything we're talking about here, a lot of it has to do with the complexity. Yeah. And that's a long-term narrative for years and years and years. Even with Paper Fast Pass, a lot of people thought it was too complicated. And that's 5 tiers down. So I don't know. And I feel like Disney's never been great about explaining these things. And cast members try their best.
Yeah, cast members do. Frontline cast members will answer any question that you have. It's just the more options you have, and especially sub options, and that's one of the big complaints about Rise of the Resistance, right? Like you've heard that VIP tour guides, if you book a VIP tour, which by the way it now tops off at $850 an hour. But if you book a VIP tour, you can now get automatic access to Rise of the Resistance, right? So a minimum 7-hour on that. So what is that? 50. Let me do the math here real quick. 7 times 850.
Yeah, that's a lot.
I should know this in my head. Just under $6,000.
Right.
So $6,000 plus gratuity. You get into Rise of the Resistance. So the feedback that I heard that some guests were giving was like, okay, great. I didn't spend $6,000 on a 1-day VIP tour, but I've spent $10,000 on my hotel at Grand Floridian. Why do I not get to ride Rise of the Resistance? Like why is $10,000 here not the same as $6,000 there? Money is money. And so I think when you look at things like paid fast pass and virtual queues or things like that, the one answer that Disney's going to have to say is, I spent X thousands of dollars on my vacation. Why are you charging me $10 to ride Seven Dwarfs Mine Train? A valid thing.
It's going to be really hard because do you think too, just kind of digging into some, could Disney, is there a possibility where they somehow include it for a certain level of resort? You've seen it where they club level, they could buy something, but let's say, I don't love the have and have nots approach that they generally take, But let's say you stay at a deluxe resort, you get a few free, or you stay at a villa, you get more, or you stay, I mean, granted, I think that's going to make people really angry, but could they do something like that to, again, as an incentive to get people to stay at hotels like we talked about with the transportation?
It's possible. I don't know that they would do it for DVC because they've already got the DVC people's money.
True.
So adding it to DVC wouldn't add any incremental revenue to their bottom line. But for deluxe, maybe. Club level, maybe. The thing is, I mean, and I don't know off the top of my head, my guess is Disney has around 8,000 or 9,000 deluxe rooms. No, probably less than that. Maybe 6,000 or 7,000 deluxe rooms. That might be too many to do sort of like a carte blanche Universal Express Pass type thing. Again, Disney wants to monetize not waiting in line. If you think about that, I mean, early theme park entry, the program that's going to roll out October 1, is 100% that, right?
Yeah.
So this is where all theme park guests get access to every park 30 minutes before the general public. And we've done tests on this to figure out how much more waiting in line offsite guests are going to do versus on-site guests. Like, assuming you had an absolutely perfect touring plan, like you literally knew everything there was to know about how the queues operate at each park, and you had enough computing power to make the absolutely perfect decision at every step of your day. We still think that offsite guests are going to wait between an hour and 2 more hours in line just because of that extra 30 minutes that onsite guests are going to get. And we've actually tested this in the park. And even at 35% park capacity, we were still seeing an hour to 90 minutes extra waiting in line at the Magic Kingdom. So again, from Disney's perspective, it's relatively inexpensive to staff parks half an hour more. But as word gets out about how much more you're going to wait in line if you stay off site, they're expecting hotel capacity goes up. But this sort of brings in sort of like I know we want to talk about attractions next, but the big tension here, right, in selling fast passes is, and the early theme park entry is, there's this tension between selling a VIP tour at $6,000 a pop, selling fast passes, and then selling resort rooms. If Disney thinks that early theme park entry is so valuable that they can charge $100 more a night for rooms, and I'm making up a number here, right? Then families will look at that and say, well, how much will $100 a day get me buying fast passes?
Right.
So like VIP tours, for example, let's say a VIP tour, supposedly they start at $450 an hour. I'm sure there's one day of the year where it is $450 an hour. And so that's $3,150. I've never been quoted less than $650 an hour. Fine. But if you're a family and you got to think, well, okay, let's say I'm going to spend $4,000 on a VIP tour for one day. How many fast passes could I buy over my vacation for the same amount of money? My sense is that Disney's cognizant of this idea of paid fast pass cannibalizing the VIP tours, right? And they make a lot of money on VIP tours. I know there's like a core group of 50 or 60 tour guides. As far as I know, they are booked 6 days a week. They have another core group that might get them to 100, 110. And then there's like an upper limit of if all hands on deck situation where it's 150 people, I think, per day. So imagine like New Year's Eve, where it's 150 tour guides, 7-hour minimum at $850 an hour. That's $892,000. If you can buy fast passes for less than $892,000, why would you need a VIP tour guide? And so I think that's part of the consideration too, right? And the VIP tour guides, like I know it's $650 to $850 an hour. Those kids are making, I think, $20 an hour tops. To
all
do this.
profit.
So the tour guides are not making. Yeah, it's all profit on Disney's side.
It's interesting because part of me thinks that it's like anything when you're a family going. Like, let's say your hotel is higher than you thought it would be. Maybe you don't eat as nice a meal, or maybe you're constantly doing that push and pull, or maybe I'll only go 3 days instead of 4, or whatever.
Yeah.
And FastPass adds another area. But is there a point where satisfaction, where, I know you mentioned, this is kind of the onus you mentioned up front about Disney's not really as focused on guest satisfaction. I mean, a lot of the changes, Magical Express, resort parking.
They're focused on revenue.
You can pick a bunch of examples that are not for guest satisfaction.
You can explain every decision that they make when just saying, will we make more money on this?
Yeah, and is there a point, though, where having lower satisfaction, because you think about when Disney really took off in the 90s, there was a real narrative of I go to Disney, not me personally, but someone goes to Disney because they have top-notch customer service. That was always the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they're clean. And yes, they have new attractions, but the big draw, my parents used to say this all the time, it's the cleanest bathrooms and they were the nicest people and whatever.
Yeah.
Is there a point where satisfaction, like I know there's a curve. It's like, is there a curve where satisfaction gets low enough where you say, sure, I love Space Mountain or Haunted Mansion or whatever, but I'm going to do, especially post-pandemic in theory, I'm going to go do something else because you can't have that low of satisfaction and have such a high cost, right?
Yeah. I know that Disney knows that a large portion of its visitors are visiting just to check the box on the bucket list that says, yes, I took my kids to Walt Disney World once, or I've been once. And for those people, I'm not saying cost is no object, but it's less of a concern than people who visit, every couple of years. The thing that's interesting to me, so I was looking at like how much Disney charges in France for fast passes, which works out to somewhere around $9 to $18 each. So the interesting thing is when you look at the average income for a French visitor, half of the visitors in Disneyland Paris are from France. 90% of them, I think, are from the EU. But if you look at the demographic that Disney targets in the United States, it starts at the top 20% of American households by income, which is roughly $131,000 a year. Right, that's their target market, right? And Disney knows this, right? Disney knows that the bottom 20%, the bottom quintile of American households simply don't spend enough money each year on vacation to afford a single day in Walt Disney World.
Right.
They've completely written off that market. And then there's the second, third, and fourth quintiles. They're sort of like, would like you to come every 5 or 10 years, right? But if you look at the top quintile, the people who make household income of $131,000 more, there's a fairly large number of those families because income is unevenly distributed in the United States. So interestingly, in the United States, to be in the top 20%, $131,000 a year, as far as I can tell. In France, to be in the top 20%, roughly $75,000 a year, right? Wow. So incomes are much less unevenly distributed in France. So I think, when we're talking about the cost of FastPass, and in France, we're looking at converting euros, and it's $9 to $18. There's two things to think about. One is France has roughly 1/5 the population of the United States, and two, their income in the top 20% is not nearly as large as the United States. So when it comes to Walt Disney World, the Disney Corporation will have a much larger group of people with much more money competing for the same amount of ride capacity, right, or similar amounts of ride capacity. So, we can look at Paris and say, okay, it's $10 to $20 per fast pass. I would be surprised if it's not more expensive than that.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Yeah. Simply because there's more money, right? So again, going back to the VIP tour thing, right? Let's say you've got a family of 4 and each fast pass that you buy is $10. So each ride that you want to buy a fast pass ride for is $40. You could do 10 rides, which is the average number of rides that people do in the Magic Kingdom in a day, for $400. Why would you buy a VIP tour?
You wouldn't.
And for that matter, why would you stay on site, right? If you know that you can avoid the extra 90 minutes to 2 hours of waiting in line by staying at a Motel 6 offsite, and instead of spending the money on the hotel, spending the money on waiting in line, why would you do that? So that's sort of the tension that Disney's sort of navigating right now. And I'll say, like, the last time I spoke to people about this, no decisions had been made about exactly how all this was going to work. I think they're going to sort of announce something, between now and the end of the year. But I wouldn't expect like a news drop in the next 2 weeks saying, this is exactly how paid FastPass is going to work and, going forward. So I still think they're trying to figure out a lot of this stuff.
But I will say, I think the challenge here is going to be current expectations, like you mentioned up front with the name FastPass, is how do you find something that, there's going to be people that'll say, I'll never do it, and then do it, like anything. But still, how do you find something that people don't get? The expectations are so like, this is how we do a trip. And yes, they've made changes before, but nothing to me probably on this level, especially if it's
it's going to be huge,
$20, $25 a FastPass or something. Personally, I'd be like, I don't even know how to even make that work.
The other thing, that I'm super interested in, again, think about Disney and at the end of the day, all they care about is revenue, right? They care about shareholder returns. They don't care about employees. They don't care about customers, right? You can say whatever you want, but let's face it, they laid off 30,000 people in the middle of a pandemic. They don't care about employees, right? I don't care what anybody says, Actions speak louder than words. Okay. So if you're thinking about, return to shareholders, which again is the only metric Disney cares about, why would you ever build more rides? Right. So this is our segue to the next topic.
No, right.
If you know,
yeah,
right. So here's the calculus, right? Building a major ride for Disney right now is $200 or $300 million. That's a hole of $200 or $300 million. Let's say you're making $50 million a year just selling fast passes for, the major mountain rides in the Magic Kingdom. Why would you add capacity and lower weights? You'd go $300 million in the hole before you started seeing $1. Like, why would you do that? So I think the thing that, that Disney's got to look at, or that, we have to look at as consumers is paid fast pass going to be a disincentive for Disney to build new rides? And we've already seen this in Epcot, right? From 2005 to 2020, Disney built no new rides.
Right.
In Epcot, right? They reimagined certain things. They added capacity at Soarin'. But like the last new ride we had was, I believe, Mission Space. They're not adding capacity at the same rate. I think I could be wrong on this. At the same rate that they used to, right? And paid fast pass is a disincentive for them to add new ride capacity. And so that's the thing we got to be worried about. But anyway, let's talk about attractions.
Yeah, I was going to ask too about capacity, because I feel like part of me even thought this with FastPass Plus. I thought if you're selling this like this huge benefit, you don't, like you've seen it with like recent additions they've made, whether it's Flight of Passage or even Navi River Journey, which could have been a 3,000 an hour type thing and wasn't, or, Rise of Resistance, Millennium Falcon, whatever you want to choose. None of those are really huge capacity attractions. But with FastPass Plus, it's like you almost are selling a bit the idea of scarcity. So going forward, and I didn't think about what you just mentioned, going forward, I mean, I assume they're going to need to build new attractions because
it's a new attraction that has 500 people an hour.
Right. like Toy Story Mania when it first opened was so low, or Seven Dwarfs Mine Train, whatever. But it's like, if they're selling FastPass, it almost, like, theoretically, I always think, well, they want to have things with high capacity so people wait in line shorter and have higher guest satisfaction.
It's not the primary concern anymore.
Yeah. So, but with Universal down the street, Epic Universe is going to come. That's going to draw some interest. I almost feel like it's almost like building new attractions just becomes a public relations move more than a satisfaction move.
I had this debate with someone at dinner last week, and so if you think about Disney and Universal, they're not a monopoly; they're an oligopoly, right? So they're two companies that basically control the theme park market in Orlando, and you can argue that they're competitors. I would argue that they move in lockstep in a lot of things. One of them introduces, date-based ticket pricing. The other one follows suit, right? One of them introduces, Fast Pass or Universal Express, some sort of line skipping scheme. The other one, does the same thing. So they're basically they signal their intent. My concern with Disney starting to monetize not waiting in line. Universal already sort of does it with its deluxe hotels, right? You can get a Universal Express pass by staying at the deluxe hotels. But basically, this is a signal to the market that they're not going to compete on building new rides. They're going to make money by, again, selling shorter waits in line. And I think that's sort of bad for the industry. Universal's building the third theme park. Universal definitely wants to become a multi-day destination. Like right now, they're probably, my guess is they're a 1 or 2 day destination. Volcano Bay might have added, an incremental part of a day to that. And Volcano Bay is a great water park. But I really think that Universal sees the third park as them being able to compete as a multi-day destination with Disney, and that's good. I'm still concerned that, two things. One, Disney's going to say we don't need to build new attractions because we're already making enough money, right? So think of the theme parks as a cash cow.
Right.
The other concern that I have is it takes Disney forever to build a ride.
Yes.
Right. I don't know if you read WW Magic, but their recent headline was Guardians of the Galaxy construction enters its 5th year. I'm like, oh, the snark. That's beautiful. It takes them forever to build a ride. And you think about, Universal adding Velocicoaster, which it's an outdoor ride. It's lighter on theming. Like, I get it. But Velocicoaster is an excellent roller coaster.
Oh, yeah.
It is. Have you been on it?
I have not, but I can. Everything I've heard has been incredible.
I went in skeptical about it. Like, my big concern with those things are always, it's Is it just going to be something where it throws you around like a rag doll?
Right.
And is there enough theming? And it is the smoothest roller coaster I think Universal's ever done. The ride sensations are nothing but pleasant the entire time. I thought they had mastered the physics of the ride experience extremely well. And I thought there was enough theming for it too. Universal did a fantastic job on that ride. Like I think it's the best roller coaster in Orlando. And they built that in under 2 years.
Yeah.
Right. How much more complicated is Guardian of the Galaxy that it takes 5? Like what is that? Or Remy, right? Remy is a clone of what's in Paris. Why does it take so long to build these things? Like, is it that they can't or they just won't, right? And so if you think about, Disney building the next, big ride, how long did it take them to open Pandora? Like 7-8 years?
Yeah.
From us? They just don't move fast, right? So, that's my other big concern, that if they needed to compete on new rides and new very good rides, they don't have a track record of, like, they'd literally have to start now in 2021 to have something by the second half of this decade. Mm-hmm. It's just not the way that Disney moves. The other thing is that they haven't proven that they can do groundbreaking rides or lands really well. Like, I think we all agree that Galaxy's Edge as a land is not what we thought it would be. Right?
No, I agree.
It is not the equivalent of Diagon Alley. It's not the equivalent of Hogsmeade. And neither is Pandora, right? Millennium Falcon, is a decent D-ticket ride. I think Rise of the Resistance is the best ride Disney's done in 30 years, but it's simply not reliable.
Right.
Right. It breaks down almost every day. When you look at that combination of things, Disney doesn't build rides fast. It's missed on basically its last 2 big lands. It's not able to build technologically complicated rides. That's not a good combination of things going forward. So again, when you go back to talking about, like, if you're Disney and all you care about is shareholder return, like, you don't care about guest satisfaction, you don't care about cast members, you care only about shareholder return, why would you ever build a big land again? It's too much risk. It takes too long, right? So that's my big concern there. I do think that Universal adding a third park is going to spur some of this. We talked before the show began about Imagineering moving from Burbank to Lake Nona in Orlando, and I think that's way overdue. And I think that's going to help. I think Disney finally recognized that the center of the theme park universe for them is Orlando, and it's been for 20 years. This thing's way overdue. So that might help too. So hopefully Walt Disney World gets some love there. But their track record lately on doing big things well is not great.
Yeah, and that raises a question too, because I like to think about, I'm looking ahead and I'm saying, especially given all the delays, where you're like, okay, Tron next year, Guardians maybe next year. I don't know.
I think Guardians next year. Yeah, I don't know. It depends. I mean, maybe both of them next year. But like, what's after that?
That's what I was going to say, because I look ahead. Universal, you got a pretty clear path. I mean, they just did Velocicoaster. They hit out of the park with Hagrid's. Before that, did Kong, whatever. Those parks are going forward, and then you have Epic Universe in 2 to 3 years. I can see, they got new hotels. I can see the path to the future for them. You can see that they're committed to a variety of things. They're committed to. I think their hotels they're all competent. Some of them have like minor complaints about the pillows at Dockside and Surfside, right? But other parts of it, like the soundproofing in the rooms, is excellent. But the rides that they've designed, Hagrid's, which it has its own technical difficulties, right? Hagrid's is not super reliable either. When they set their minds to doing something, whether it's Velocicoaster or whether it's Hagrid's or whether it's Cabana Bay or Volcano Bay, they do stuff well and they do it quickly. And again, they miss on some things too, but you can tell that they're really thinking about the guest experience as the first or second thing. Obviously they want to make money too, but whereas Disney entirely cares about revenue, and shareholder value, Universal Orlando, it seems to me it's not their primary concern right now. They're still in a build-out phase. And, I joke about this with Jamel all the time. Like, little did we know that Michael Eisner would be the second best CEO that the Disney company
ever had. But if you look at what Eisner did, I see you laughing on that too. Like,
True.
God, Jesus, if we only right. But if you think about what Eisner did, built 2 new parks. But think about the resorts that he built: Wilderness Lodge, Animal Kingdom Lodge, right? The moderate resorts, all the value resorts. Like, he was not only interested, and don't forget me wrong, he made a lot of money for shareholders, right?
Oh, yeah.
But let me ask you this question: is the current management team, is Iger or Chapek, will they ever build a Wilderness Lodge? No. They will never build a hotel like Wilderness Lodge or Animal Kingdom Lodge. They will build generic shaped hotels like Riviera or Coronado Springs, add some light exterior theming to it, and try and do their best with smoke mirrors and paint on the inside. They built basically Hampton Inns, and try and add some Disney theming to it and charge a premium for it. But Eisner, for all of his faults, was a fan of architecture and understood the intrinsic value of the kind of theming that Disney used to be able to do. And like I said, there's absolutely no way in the current environment, the current management team, they will never approve a resort like Wilderness Lodge. They simply won't. It's just not in their DNA. It's like saying, Dan, let's go to the moon tomorrow. Like the mental concept of it is something that they can't conceive of.
Yeah, well, before we move on, last question. I mean, this is more open-ended, but beyond the management team, looking at the resort, I mean, because I look at the resort and I say they need more capacity. They need to do a lot of C and D ticket attractions that draw a lot of people, that don't take 5 years to make. You can do in a year or two, especially in Epcot and even in Hollywood Studios and a little bit in Animal Kingdom too. And they just need to find things for people to do that people like. So setting aside what they will actually do, what do you think about what could they do that would make it a better experience? Like, as far as attractions.
I think to your point, there's a couple of things that they can do. One is they simply need to add more capacity, right? So every time I see a discussion about, is Disney adding a 5th park or should Disney add a 5th park? My knee-jerk response, like it's part of my reptilian lizard brain at this point, right? My instinctive response is, shouldn't we finish the 3rd and 4th, right? Shouldn't we build out Hollywood Studios and Animal Kingdom to do that? And there's a tons of things that Disney is not space constrained in any of its parks, and to a large extent, the success that the current management team has in terms of revenue is directly traced back to the fact that Walt was smart enough to buy 28,000 acres, right? Disney does not have the problem that Universal has. If Universal had the same amount of acreage, Disney would be in trouble. I think they need to add capacity. I think they need to improve the speed with which they do attractions. The other thing I think they need to do is sort of 2 things. They spend a lot of time and effort on plussing up existing attractions, like adding stuff to Pirates of the Caribbean or a Haunted Mansion. And that's not where the focus needs to be. All right, so I'll say a controversial opinion. You can edit this out if you want. I'm fairly convinced that a large number of people who work for Disney in Imagineering and in management do not visit the parks as a guest. Like, they simply have no concept of how their day-to-day decisions impact people who pay money to be there. I'm 100% convinced of that. And because, they get into the parks for free, they get super discounts on the resorts, right? They get special parking, they get special treatment, right? If they had to pay what guests had to pay and they had to go what guests had to go through, things would change. And so I think Imagineering moving to Orlando, I think, is actually going to be a net positive going forward, because if nothing else, they're going to hear from their neighbors who went and said, why the hell do I have to wait 4 hours in a line for Flight of Passage? Why did you build a larger capacity ride? Why aren't there more things to do to alleviate that line, right? So I think building capacity is one aspect of it, but I think simply the other aspect of it is the people who